Hey everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse, and I just went camping in the Cybertruck, and we're going to tell you everything about it because I learned a couple of interesting things.
Next on In Depth.
So before I went camping, we got the CyberTent, and we picked it up at the Tesla service center. Now, they did not install it for us. You can have Tesla install it for you, but my service appointment would have been too late. It would have been in the middle of my camping trip, and that wouldn't have worked. So luckily, the service center was really, really nice, and they were able to just kind of give it to me 2 weeks before I had an available appointment, which was really great.
Yeah, so we're showing you here how we installed it first, and I think it was a good thing we did it so you knew what was going to happen during your trip.
So the steps were essentially to add these brackets to the side of the Cybertruck's bed.
And that was relatively easy.
That was pretty easy. It was a really nifty design, the way that they have these like holes and you kind of slide things in and tighten them up. So that was great. And that was what gives you the support for the tent. The tent essentially sits on top of these. And then you have to mount the tent itself to these bars. Okay. And you do that with 2 screws, which go into some threaded parts of the thing. And the problem was it was a little hard to do that. Essentially, you're relying on the tolerance of the entire truck.
Oh, I remember that took us a while to get that right.
I was worried about misthreading it and all sorts of problems. And it was mainly, I think, because the truck can vary quite a bit in terms of its like actual bed width. And we're trying to line up 2 like screw holes, one on either side.
This seems so Tesla. I'm sorry, but like the world does not stay perfect when you take into account expansion and whatever.
So I did get it on there. If I were to tell myself now, it shouldn't be that big a deal. But essentially, 2 screws are what keeps the CyberTent in place.
From like bouncing out.
From bouncing out while you're driving along. And it's all folded up. So then once you have that in place, you're ready to go camping.
But wait.
But wait. When it is time to go camping and you want to set up the tent, and I would definitely set up the tent before you go camping, you have to remove this part of the car. So this part of the truck is called the aero flap. It's what goes basically from the glass roof to the tonneau cover, because the tonneau cover kind of comes up in a round thing, and this keeps it flat all the way across. You have to remove that in order to set up the tent. This means that when you get to your campsite, you need to break out a Torx wrench, which is a little bit scary. And also, if you drop these bolts, they will fall into the mechanism of the tonneau cover. So that's really, really stressful.
And so you bought a special torque wrench that would do exactly what you wanted to do, because it comes with one, but it wasn't exactly what you wanted.
They gave me like an Allen Torx wrench. So it's like just a bent piece of metal with the Torx thing at the end. And the problem is you have to turn it like, I'm not joking, at least 50 times, right? So that's 50 times of you having to go in, and you can only put in like a quarter turn. So it's a huge, huge pain to use the normal one. So what I did is I went to Harbor Freight and I bought myself the right tool for the job. I could only find the proper Torx size in a 3/8 drive. So I got a 3/8 ratchet and a 3/8 Torx, which is a T30. And so I got that, and that allows me to ratchet it. So I just have to go, and you have to do it for a while. So you have to do that on both sides. You have to loosen both of those bolts, and then you kind of snap the thing out, which is really stressful. And then you'd store that in the bed when it's time to set up the tent. Setting up the tent was pretty easy. Yeah. All you have to do is unfold it, which you can then do when I got to the campsite, I forgot that I had to I had taken the bolts out, but I hadn't unsnapped the thing. So I was like, why is it so tight? It's because I hadn't taken the thing out. So once you unfold it, you unfold these legs. They fold down on top of the tailgate. So the tailgate remains folded down the whole time. That gives you more room. And so then once you've done that, they give you an air pump, this really big manual air pump. I don't know why they give you a manual one, why you couldn't use an electric one. I think it might be the pressure.
Well, also because it gives you air as you're pumping and as you're pulling.
Yeah, so it is a double action pump, which was nice. So then what you do is you essentially snap on the pump and you pump up the tent.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So the tent is, instead of using tent poles or anything like that, it just inflates. And it's not it's not a bouncy castle or anything. It's just the struts that hold everything up. And that's pretty cool. So it has a rain fly and then has kind of the mesh interior bit.
I think everyone wants to know, how comfortable is the bed part?
Oh, it's not at all. It's about 1-inch foam, non-continuous because there's folding parts. Mm-hmm. So it's not don't think that you can just fall asleep in this. I know that there's some people who will say, I think that's perfectly comfortable. And that's awesome because, you are a walking 2x6. I think that that's really cool that you can like lay down on the ground and fall asleep. I am not like that. I require a bed. So I took some measurements and I said, okay, so this is a full-sized mattress. So I went to Walmart. I picked up an inflatable mattress that was full-sized. It was like $20. I was like, oh my gosh, it's perfect. And we used that as the base of the mattress. So that sat on top of the, the 1-inch foam, which I'm sure helped a lot. Then I took a mattress topper that I had lying around and I put that on top.
Didn't you lose a lot of volume?
I did lose quite a bit of space on the inside. So the tent was a little bit closer to you than you normally would.
What if you just used a topper?
You could have just used the topper.
How about a dream case?
I'm a side sleeper, so I require quite a bit of smush because my whole shoulder has to go in so I can lay on my side.
I do have a question. Would the dream case have worked?
Dream case probably would have worked. I, again, as a side sleeper,
you like more foam.
I need a lot of smush. So,
all right, so let's jump ahead here. Let's talk about the Cybertruck.
Yes.
Because you used a lot of cool gadgets while you were there. You had a waffle maker and a griddle.
So what I did was I brought along one of the large batteries that we tested. We've tested on Now Let's Review. I brought the Pecron E2000, I believe is what it's called, along with its...
The 3000.
The 3000.
So you had 5 kilowatt hours of battery?
I had 5 kilowatt hours of backup
Why did you
battery.
need that? You have 140 kilowatt hours in the battery of the Cybertruck.
So I wanted to do a little bit of testing, and I'm glad that I did. So let's just kind of start at the beginning of the trip here. I drove all the way up to northern New Hampshire from Massachusetts, so this was kind of a long trip. I took a nice scenic route. I drove up to Lincoln, and then I drove across the Kankamangas Highway to North Conway. Charged up in North Conway. There's a nice supercharger there at the Hannaford. Got some ice for my cooler. Got a couple of the things that I had forgotten. And then we drove to Bethel, Maine, which was 35 miles away from the campsite. Okay. So that's pretty good. I charged up most of the way in North Conway and then topped it off up in Bethel. So that way when I got to the campsite, I had like 273 miles of range.
That should be all you need.
That was definitely all that I need. So I got to the campsite, set up my tent. It was a super heat wave.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was about 96 degrees during the day.
Yuck.
76 was the coolest that it got at about 4 o'clock in the morning. So it was really, really hot. I had brought with me a battery-powered fan, and it ran on AA batteries.
Oh, tiny.
Tiny, pathetic, completely useless. Trash, horrible. That was a big mistake. The CyberTent is very warm. I am excited to test it in the winter because I think that I will be able to survive winter camping in the Cybertruck. I'm not even kidding. So it's a very warm tent. So the next day, after my horrible night's sleep of sweat and being way too hot, we went and we bought a box fan. So just your typical box fan, your Lasco box fan. And I ran it off of the backup batteries that I had brought. And it used 73 watts and used hardly any energy out of those batteries. I think they were still at 98% the next
Why didn't
morning.
you just plug it into the Cybertruck?
So I was a little bit worried about turning anything on the Cybertruck on. So let's backtrack a little bit. As soon as I arrived at the campsite, I shut off Sentry mode in the truck.
Okay.
So there's 2 separate ways to shut off Sentry mode. One is with your app, and the other one is in the truck. If you do it in the truck, that will allow the truck to go to sleep.
Okay.
When it goes to sleep, it disconnects the contactor to the high voltage pack.
Okay.
And that means that it does not lose any range.
Oh, interesting.
So there was quite a few times because this trip was so hot that I had to hop in the truck, turn on the AC, and blast myself because it was so hot out camping. It was very unpleasant. I was using some energy.
And you're not alone here. As Elon says here, he likes it cold.
There were quite a few times where I was using actual air conditioning to cool myself off during the day.
But I don't understand. If you use the app, it wouldn't shut all the way off?
It doesn't shut all the way off, I think because you can turn it back on with the app.
Okay, but when you aren't doing anything in the truck, why would it be using that much energy?
The truck is very, very thirsty when Sentry mode is activated, and I think it's just because it's awake. I think that it uses a lot of energy when it's awake.
How much energy are you talking about?
I'm talking at least 13-ish miles a night.
Wow.
So that's not nothing. If you were doing a longer term camping thing, I was expecting to do 4 nights, 5 days of camping. Weather brought me down to 3 nights, 4-ish days. If this was a long-term thing and I had Sentry mode on, it would definitely have brought the battery down to, I wouldn't say like a scary amount, because Sentry mode will shut off at 20%, which would leave me with about 60 miles of range, which should be enough to get back to Bethel. But like, that's scary, right? People get a little bit nervous about that. So anyway, I was trying to test out different things because I also wanted to test out the batteries. The batteries were freaking awesome.
Oh, you're talking about the Pecron.
The Pecron battery was awesome.
That allowed you to bring solar panels.
I brought along some big 400-watt solar panels. And the cool thing was, I also brought an electric griddle. I also brought a waffle maker.
Of course you did.
I brought lots of other things. I brought way too much stuff. That's another thing. I'm an inexperienced camper. And so this time camping, I've been car camping in the Model 3, but because you need to camp in the Model 3, you don't have that much room to bring stuff. I had way too much room to bring stuff. I had 6 full totes. Okay, giant totes in the Cybertruck, and that's because below the CyberTent you have room.
That's storage.
You have room for like 9 totes. I probably could have fit 12 if I really wanted to. I think 9 might be the limit, but I mean, there was a lot of room in the Cybertruck. Plus, the whole back seat, those seats fold up.
Right.
So I brought way too much stuff. Now, the griddle and the waffle maker were very good because in the morning, with it being so hot, you didn't want to start a fire because a fire throws off a lot of heat. That heats you up along with your food. So the griddle was really nice for like bacon and eggs and that kind of thing. The waffle maker was great for waffles. Although waffles camping, having a big bowl of batter when there's tons and tons of bugs out, not really great. But it was an interesting test. This I'm drawing like 1,500 watts max from this griddle. So the batteries were really cool. And then when I set up my solar panels, I was able to charge the batteries back up to full in like 15 minutes.
Wow.
So really, I was not using a lot of energy. And the fan wasn't using that much energy either, 73 watts. Okay, so the first night with the fan, I used it off of the backup batteries. The second night, I used the fan with the outlets, which meant that the truck stayed awake. I lost about 13 miles of range that night. And by the way, I went to bed at like 11 o'clock at night, and I woke up at like 9. So
10 hours.
10-ish hours, losing 13 miles. It's more than a mile an hour, which I think is a lot. What I've picked up here is I didn't necessarily need to bring the solar panels, even though they're awesome. Also, I was able to charge up the truck using the battery pack.
Oh, cool.
And the solar panels. So
How much juice did you get in there?
I got 1 mile.
Okay.
Over the course of quite a few hours. I had set the amperage to 5 amps charging speed because I didn't want to deplete the batteries, and we were leaving for the day because it was so hot out. It was cool to know that I could recharge the truck using a solar system. More of a proof of concept than anything particularly.
And this is 2
useful.
400-watt panels, about 800 watts of solar.
Yeah, I think I was getting around 600 or 700 watts in the midday sun.
Interesting. I mean, a mile or 2 of range, I mean, I guess you could get yourself to someplace.
Right. But especially when you lose so much when the truck is awake, that's kind of the weird part. I had to basically shut off the outlets unless I wanted to have the truck stay awake. And there's many ways that the truck can stay awake, either with the door open. I didn't test this out, which is if you have it in CyberTent mode, which is really cool. Let's talk about that for a second. Okay. CyberTent mode will level the truck. So it'll bring it up nice and level, so that way when you're in the tent, it feels like you're in
and we tested that the few days before, and we've got footage of it here.
Yes.
And we used a level, and it was level.
It was level, which is really nice. In that mode, it was able to go to sleep, but you can also turn on the bed lights, the headlights, or the tail lights. I didn't test these out because they just would have attracted bugs at night, and it was very, very buggy where we were. So I didn't test that out. I'm not sure if that would keep the truck awake or not.
Probably would.
Having the truck be asleep was really good because it just let me relax because I wasn't losing range.
I just feel like, I mean, unless you're going to be out in the tundra for days and days and days, that as long as you're somewhat near a supercharger, which you were 35 miles away, that you could have relaxed about it on your next trip because, I mean, losing 13 miles, while it sounds like a lot, and it would be for a Leaf, with this big a battery, it's not that big a deal.
No, it's a good point. And I was able to get to my camp with quite a lot of range. I just think that there's a lot of situations where you're either going
judicious.
You might be going really far out there. You might be. So I think that having this secondary backup battery is nice. And you could do it without solar panels, charging it up with the truck, because the 73 watts of energy from the fan should not have dropped me 13 miles over the course of that night, right? It's the truck staying awake.
Right.
So if the truck can charge your battery fast, let's say in an hour, then okay, not a big deal. You lose 1 mile of range to charge up this 1 kilowatt hour battery or so. That's a pretty good trade-off to have. And then you can shut the truck off and use that battery over the span of a longer time.
That's interesting.
So the nights that I had the box fan, I was pretty comfortable, even though it was extremely hot out. The first night that we had the fan, we opened up the windows that are in the rain fly because it wasn't raining. And so I got a nice cross breeze going. The next night that we used the box fan, it was raining. So
you had to keep that closed.
I had set up the canopy on the rear of the tent. So right at the opening of the tent, you can set up a canopy that kind of extends out, gets you a little bit more rain coverage. It didn't keep anything on the ground dry, but it was able to keep both the bed dry, and it was allowed me to keep that door open. So I was able to bring in some fresh air, but I wasn't able to open the window in the rear. So the cross breeze wasn't quite there. It was a little bit more of a moist evening.
So I have a question. When you get to the campsite and you have to take that piece off the truck, how long does that take to take off? And then how long when you're going home does it take to put back on?
So I have a toolbox that I brought with me, which turned out to be pretty helpful. In that toolbox, I have obviously the tool that I talked about before. That allowed me to take off the aero flap, I would say within about 5 minutes. Feels a lot longer when you're doing it because people are like, why isn't the tent up? It wasn't that bad. It's mainly just threading on and unthreading those screws and not dropping them.
And not losing them.
And not losing them during your trip. So I had a magnetic dish that I got from Harbor Freight, of course, that I kept in my toolbox.
I do think that's a weak part of this design, to be honest.
Yeah.
It would be nice if they came off without bolts or if it didn't need to be taken off at all.
I agree. It definitely gives you an extra 3 inches within the tent, so I can see why they had you remove it. But yeah, the steps of removing it, those screws are extremely long and deep. And
when we first took it off, they had Loctite, which makes
extremely difficult to take off. In fact, I thought that I was misthreading it when I was loosening it, and that's because it had the Loctite on.
That's good to know.
It was good to know. As it started to wear off, it's become a lot easier to remove and to put back on. Now, when I was charging the truck, what's interesting is when I'm charging off of these batteries, the truck's charger is smart enough to know there's something wrong with the battery because the battery doesn't have the ground bonded to the neutral. Normally, in an electrical box, the ground is bonded to the neutral. So I had to make my own grounding plug.
You didn't bring a pre-made one?
I didn't bring a pre-made one. So what I did was I went to a hardware store. I found the cheapest. This one was basically a little extension cord with the ground. And I cut the extension cord.
And tied the neutral to the ground.
And I tied the neutral to the ground with a little bit of electrical tape. And
wow, so you made your own bonding plug.
Yeah.
Neutral bonding plug.
And that actually worked. So if you're ever in this situation and you're like, what do I do? That is what you do. Luckily, I brought my wire strippers with me because they were in my toolbox.
We'll try and put a link down below to like Amazon or something so you can just pre-buy one.
If you have a pre-bought one, it's going to be a lot safer. You won't have like a hot dangling around. But it was really useful to be able to have that.
All right, so this is not a cheap tent.
No.
Do you think it was worth it?
It's a good question.
I guess it depends on how much you're going to use it.
Depends on how much you're going to use it. The things that I liked about it were you're up off the ground. So when it was raining, I didn't have to worry that the tent was going to be wet.
Right.
As long as I had remembered to close the rain flies, I was pretty sure that the tent was going to stay dry and that I would be up off the ground.
What I like about it is unlike the Rivian tent where you're pulling it through the air with you, so kind of increasing your air resistance. This is inside the Cybertruck. No one knows you have it until you get to the campground.
It's true, and it stays dry while you're driving around, and you're right, it doesn't increase your aero drag. So I think that's pretty cool. Also, I've noticed, I've had it in the truck for like 2 weeks now, it very rarely gets in the way. There will be times when you need to transport a lot of stuff, but like I've thrown a bike in the back and it's been able to slide underneath the tent and stuff like that. So if you were like the kind of person who's like, I might just jet set off at any point in time.
You could keep it in all summer.
You could pretty much keep it in all summer. The air pump would take up the most amount of room. I think that you might be able to get away with an electric one. I haven't tested it though. It would have to basically be able to reach 8 psi, which I think is kind of a tall order for an electric pump. It's not the same as an air mattress, which is just kind of getting you up to 0 psi.
Did you have to keep pumping it up every day, or did it stay?
Stayed perfectly good the whole time. So then it rained, and I was worried about packing it back up. I've not unpacked it since then, so
You should.
I should. But when I went to go pack it up, it was dry. So it had basically rained until about 10 o'clock the night before. In the morning, it was bone dry and ready to pack up.
Oh, that's great.
So that was really good. That made me feel really good. Now, obviously, the waterproof coating on the tent right now is as good as it'll ever be.
Right.
And that might get worse and worse. It might wet more over time.
The build quality seemed really good.
Right. Now, I also had a fan running the whole night inside the tent, which may have helped.
Yeah, that could have helped.
But the build quality is pretty good. In terms of the price,
It seems really steep.
it's really steep for what you're getting, since I
Yeah.
had to add my own mattress.
I mean, since you can buy an $80 Walmart tent, you know.
Right. Like there are tents that are bigger than this that would do a similar thing. And you might be able to find a tent that you could set up in the bed. You wouldn't have the platform, but maybe you could set up in the bed and that would keep you up off the ground. You might even be able to sleep in the vault itself because it is an enclosed space.
Sure.
A lot of people that we've seen have been adding like screens to kind of the end of the...
Yeah, you get a lot more square footage.
You get a lot more square footage within the vault. It's going to be kind of dark in the vault, although in CyberTent mode, you can turn on the bed lights, which are very bright. So you could, and it's controllable with your app. So you might be able to get away with not needing this tent. I think what it's really made me feel like is I am very interested in the other options out there.
Like what? Oh, like
Space Campers, Cyberlander, Camp 365. There's a bunch of different companies that are coming out with Cybertruck specific tents or camping solutions that I think are really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to all of them, and hopefully we'll be able to test them out for you.
Yes, I really want to test them out because the CyberTent was good, but it wasn't amazing. There's a lot of caveats with that. It was extremely hot that time.
Yeah, but this is some of the hottest weather you're going to...
So to a certain extent, I'm glad that I had an extreme to test for you guys because I think that it's an interesting data point to see that in the hottest weather, you basically need a box fan blowing on you just to fall asleep.
How was it? In the Rivian, there's a ladder, and so
Yes.
it was always kind of tricky for me. I had to do a lot of thinking before I went in or out. How was it going in or out? Because you've got the nice tailgate to kind of platform off of.
Right. I had to buy a step stool
Oh, to get into the
to get up to the tailgate. From the tailgate, it's not that bad a step because you're climbing in. So you're not like, it's not like a stair. So that 16-inch jump, which is a lot higher than a typical stair riser, is fine because you're mainly just sitting on it to get into the tent. But that step up to the tailgate is going to be in the 20 to 30 inch range. And it really depends on the terrain around your car. So yeah, I bought a step stool before I left so that way I could kind of hop up. I bought like a little folding one. I might even go as crazy as getting a full work platform. They sell little work platforms.
So that you'd have a real step.
You'd have like a real step the whole way across because
Still
when
dangerous.
you can't see, you might miss that step. And if you
Interesting.
think that it's there, you could fall and hurt yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was no like solution. I had to supply the solution. So I had to supply the mattress. I had to supply the step. I had to get a fan in there.
But you were really glamping. I just want to point out, for those of you watching who are like, I just go in the middle of the woods with a tarp and I'm good.
Sure.
Like, this isn't what you were doing. You wanted the full comfort experience.
Well, I wanted to be able to fall asleep, and it was really, really, really hot out. I think that most nights outside, it's going to, at least in our neck of the woods, it's going to get down into the 60s, and that's very comfortable.
And that's where you want the tent to be a little warm.
Exactly.
Right. This is just the opposite.
This was just the worst scenario.
Anyway, I hope we answered some of your questions about CyberTent. I'm so glad that we were able to set it up first and that you knew what you were doing before you got there, because that can always be stressful if you get to the campsite a little late.
Yeah. And if you guys have lots of questions, leave them down in the comments below and hit the like button. If we get 10,000 likes on this video, we can do a follow-up where we answer some of the top questions, because I know that I'm not thinking of everything.
I think if we get 10,000 likes, you should answer all of them. I'm going to volunteer him, folks.
20,000 likes.
I think
I'll answer all of
10,000
them.
likes, and he'll answer them all. I'll make him answer
All
them
right,
all.
fine. So then when we were done camping, the coolest part was that I packed everything up, and because the Cybertruck is now its own self-contained unit, we were able to drive home, and I drove up Mount Washington
Oh, nice.
on the way home.
Is that what this picture is here?
Yes.
That's awesome.
So
Were you the first Cybertruck up Mount Washington?
I don't think so.
Why?
They seem really blasé when I pulled up. They're like, oh, yeah,
We've
you're
seen
electric.
this before.
You're like electric. I'd say, keep on a low gear on the way down, but I know you're just going to be generating electricity, which I thought was really funny.
Comment down below if you've driven a Cybertruck up Mount Washington before us.
The only other thing I will say is if you do drive your whole camping rig up Mount Washington, is all my totes, because they're watertight, air leaked out of them on the way up because the pressure's so low. And then on the way down, they started to get crushed in.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, that's so weird.
Yeah. So one of the things you don't really consider. But yeah, the Cybertruck was great on the way home. We stopped in North Conway to get a few extra miles, like about 100 miles, and then we drove straight home from there. So great.
You could have made it all the way to your campsite on one charge and then one charge on the way home.
I could have just charged only in North Conway
Right.
and skipped Bethel altogether.
Yeah. It is nice to get your campsite with a lot of juice.
Right.
But
I wanted to experiment a little bit. I wanted to see how much range I could have at the end. And I was able to maintain the range by letting the truck go to sleep. So I think it was a really interesting test. It was not a very fun camping trip, just from the perspective of the heat and the bugs. But
next trip will be better.
next trip is going to be better. I'm going to go when it's cooler.
Nice. Very smart.
And I think that's going to be a lot better.
Very smart. Yeah. And if you have any camping tips for us, please leave them below as well. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching.
Now you know.